Welcome back to another Q&A. I'll be doing these every 2 weeks from now on, so if you have any questions, post yours down below and let's begin. Hey Alex, I remember you saying about stability being essential for hypertrophy, and to my understanding, this is why you're now doing seated presses instead of standing, correct? Regarding this point, would using elbow sleeves / wraps increase this potential for hypertrophy considering they offer more stability and support? Not wraps, because you're really getting a rebounding effect, and this is why we even have to differentiate between sleeves and wraps in competition for the squat. There's often a 100-pound gap between the two. So if you're getting assistance in the part of the range of motion that is most hypertrophic, then this is obviously not what you want. It could be good in terms of displaying strength in a competitive environment, but for general training, it's like me saying the slingshot bench press is superior to a rod bench. No, one is like having a second pair of pecs that literally helps you where most people fail. Whereas sleeves don't really help you. They're just there to provide warmth. Now, is it true that if you wear 2 sizes smaller, that you might get something out of them? Maybe. But are you going to train like that year round? Probably not. You're going to save those for competition and only for the squat. You're certainly not going to be wearing that for the bench either. So assuming they fit appropriately, does force production go up? If the answer is no, then the effect on your muscle gains will be the same. However, is that different when wearing a belt? Yes, because now force production literally goes up. There's a quantifiable effect. And what I found is on movements that are generally unstable, where there are limiting factors by the antagonist muscles, making your job at bracing easier could be potentially slightly more hypertrophic. Like, I think it's a very smart idea if you're going to do the standing overhead press to wear a belt. So this extra stability only really matters on movements that are generally unstable. Does that make sense? Which might include a lot of free weighted movements. But if it's a machine or something that's back supported, you're wedged in, does it really make a big difference? Not really. A lot of it is going to be psychological. Do you think that good mornings from a pure hypertrophy context are roughly equivalent to something like an RDL? I used to do RDLs a lot, but due to my leverages, I found I was never really able to get a great ROM or stretch without rounding and often tweaking my lower back. I've been doing good mornings for the past year or so as my main hinge, and from a stimulus perspective, I find them to be quite comparable. Not to mention the fatigue compared to deadlift seems a lot lower. There's a lot to say here, but in terms of the great range of motion of the RDL, that's 100% customizable depending on your build. You don't have to go deep. It's all about your active range of motion. So if that means going slightly below your kneecap, that probably just means you have bad deadlift leverages, long torso, short arms. But it does not mean that you didn't maximally go through hip flexion. That is your active range. And this is why people need to stop with these arbitrary discussions on range of motion. Anthropometry is the #1 factor when it comes to hip hinges, not the size of Olympic plates, which was dictated by the sport of Olympic weightlifting. That is why they are that measurement. It just so happens that we continue to use that size because it looks pretty and it's standardized, but there's no magical rule that suggests the plates have to skin the ground. That is absolute nonsense. And anyone says you must do this on an RDL is full of shit. They are a liar, they're biased, and they probably have very good leverages and they want you to conform to what they are doing. Now, on the point of lower back recovery and rounding, is that a potential cause? Absolutely, because you are lifting a lot heavier than a good morning. So you might have a little bit of a weak point and in general get fatigued faster. See, the major benefit of good mornings is their superior stimulus to fatigue ratio. But movement pattern wise, are they the same? Yes. That is what the squat hinge continuum dictates. The RDL is a hip hinge with a bar on your hands. The good morning is a hip hinge with the bar on your back. What changes are the leverages, the moment arms. The good morning is higher up. So what does that do? From a proximity to failure standpoint, the spinal rectors might be slightly more of a limiting factor. So let's say you have 5 reps in reserve for your glutes. Maybe you only have 3 reps left for your lower back. Maybe. Again, this is not set in stone. It's going to vary for every person. There could be a 1 to 2 rep difference. But other than that, the glutes and hamstrings are being similarly loaded. It's about the weight being magnified. And this is why the good morning will probably be about 150 pounds less than your RDL. But it doesn't mean you're getting any less jack from it. All it suggests is that you are getting more out of less weight. And because there's not a stretch on your upper back, or you having to grip it, even if you're wearing straps, that leads to better recovery. You can do good mornings at a much higher frequency and volume compared to RDLs. It won't beat you down the same way. Like for me to get an adequate stimulus, I have to go over 4 plates on the RDL. If I do that too much, it's going to be the same like you. Whereas good mornings, the max I'll do for rep work is 2.5 plates. And even if I get it up to 3, it's still not as bad as heavy ass RDLs. And this is why I favor them as well. My training this year has been squats and good mornings with some accessories on the side. But those two have done more for me than anything else. And you know what? The good morning also carries over better to your squat, coincidentally, since you have that specificity action. But at the same time, you're not getting weaker at hip hinges because that's what you're doing. Like when I started training my legs seriously again, I did 405 for 5 reps on the RDL. A few months later, I did only good mornings. Ended up tripling my strength. Got 405 for 15 reps. And then, not too long ago, I decided to test it again. I got 455, which is 4.5 plates for 9 reps. Probably could have gotten a 10th, but the strap slipped to the side and my lower back gave out at the very end. But just to say, this has been pure carryover from squats and good mornings. With the good morning being the primary driver, because when I started getting lazier on those, my RDL progress also slowed down. So, can you get brutally strong at RDLs without doing a single time? Yes. And for those who say, oh, it's still not specific enough, the best way to get better is through RDLs. Sure. But let me ask you a question. Would you be satisfied with my numbers? Because there's a lot of people who can't do that. I bet most people would be happy to even do 4 plates for 5 to 10, let alone 4.5. So if you're satisfied pulling as much as me, and keep in mind, I have way more potential. Like I didn't even hit what I'm supposed to hit on the good mornings yet, then maybe you should consider it, considering the SFR ratio. Yo, how can I maximize lower body hypertrophy at home with limited equipment? I only got 2 adjustable dumbbells, 37 pounds max on each one. See, I gotta be real with you and say you won't. It's not possible. You will never maximize your leg development with 37-pound dumbbells. Not in a million years. I don't care if you have the best genetics. I don't care if you're Ronnie Coleman. It's not gonna happen with light-ass weight like that. It cannot be done. So either go to a gym or invest in more dumbbells or settle for having subpar development. The best you're ever gonna do is pistol squats with those dumbbells, which isn't heavy weight, because you can even work up to doing 50 and 100 pounds, which many guys have documented before, and even those guys tend to not have the biggest legs. Then you can do super high rep stuff, but there's going to be a cutoff point, which is around 30 repetitions. So you can try doing Bulgarian split squats, 30 reps to failure each leg, which is highly inefficient, but eventually that's going to stall. And then you can do sissy squats, which is probably the best thing you could possibly do at home. Weighted sissy squats, 37 each. Okay, you got a bit over 70 pounds. Yeah, that's going to build some wicked quads. But that's about all you're going to have. You won't have well-developed glutes, in my opinion. And then for the hamstrings, you can try to do Nordic leg curls, but you need to have a setup for that as well. So you're probably going to have to buy one of those Nordic roller things or strap yourself onto something. Either way, you're going to have to buy something to anchor yourself. But assuming you could do them, let's say you find a couch or whatever, those are really hard. I can't even do them. It's probably not feasible for most of you. I mean, you can follow knees over toes guy and try to get those standards, but do you know anyone who could do 3 sets of 10 on this exercise? Probably very few. So that's a journey in itself. You can spend the next few years doing that, great. Or you can find more efficient ways, like doing leg curls or hip hinges. But again, those are going to be limited. Your RDLs, that's not strong if you're doing 37 each hand. Even if you put it up on your neck and do good mornings like that, still not enough. You can try leg curling it, I suppose, by strapping it to your ankles and doing it like standing up. But again, your options are very limited, and I just don't understand for the life of me why you would settle for such light weights. Like, don't get me wrong, you could build legs with calisthenics and limited equipment, but even when I come out with my calisthenics program, the weighted section is going to go beyond the numbers you just suggested. So that's what I'm saying, bro. You got to invest a little bit more into your physique. Hi, Alex. In your experience, do you think heavy barbell lunges transfer over well to barbell back squats? Ish. It depends if you mean immediately or in the long term. So the best lunge I ever did was 300 pounds, full range of motion, Zercher style. This was at the very end of 2019. I've also done 225 for reps regularly. You've seen this. My squat was my worst lift. Literally late intermediate. I wouldn't even call it advanced at the time. That's kind of embarrassing considering my entire upper body was elite. That said, when I did start training my legs, they responded very quickly because I already had the muscle mass and the strength on the hip hinges. And plus I hadn't done any squats whatsoever. So there was zero specificity. So perhaps it's a bit misleading for me to say I was of that caliber. Perhaps you can say I was maximum, like at best, an advanced squatter. Now I'm elite. But the point is, in a direct sense of carryover, it didn't do that for me. However, I would say that lunges definitely carried over to my hip hinges. That's been my experience. It did a great job building up my glutes, and there was a time where I only did lunges. I came in at 165, trap bar deadlifted 700. And in the past, that used to be an RPE 12 grinder. Y'all remember that, right? I smoked it like it was nothing. It was all lunges that got the job done with some lightweight good mornings, but there's nothing heavy in there. So I know that it was a unilateral work that I've been focusing on for all this time. So if you're correcting a weakness that is your posterior chain and use it as a secondary motion or an accessory just to get some volume and hypertrophy, those primary movers, it's great. But you shouldn't be relying on it to build a massive squat. The best way to build your squat is to squat bilateral all freaking day. What got me to 507 was SSB squats, belt squats, low bar, squatting with chains, actually being specific. Now, could you say that the lunges accelerated my progress to a certain extent? Sure. Like, I added over 100 pounds to my squat in less than a year. And I took it to a number that most guys will never reach. Maybe that says a little something, but I think there's too many confounding factors to point it to lunges. Is there any long-term shoulder health concern with doing all your presses with your back press against the bench? No. I know who you heard this from. And this is the same person who says that upright rows are bad for your shoulders, that you should avoid leg extensions, bench press, full range of motion is killing your gains. Unfortunately, much of that information is designed to fearmonger you. So, back support. Aren't stable movements safer? And this idea that your scapula can't rotate because it's pressed in. Have you ever tried doing that? Because even if you lie down on a bench, okay, you're 100% flat, you can protract. You can move it. So if you can't do that, what's the actual culprit? Simple. You're holding maximum retraction. So is the problem back support or you not listening to your body, fighting your own mechanics? I think there's one clear answer. So when I do my seated anterior delt press, I'm not retracting my scapula. I'm allowing it to fully move. I'm good. And then the other thing you have to factor in is we're not just pressing. When you do your rows or any pull, your scapula is fully moving. And that's what's really going to help your shoulder health. Working on the posterior muscles. And keep in mind, you can always do weight training with back support and then calisthenics on the side to supplement it, where you're doing push-ups and handstand push-ups and all this other stuff where there's maximum freedom. Hey Alex, if you are in hard training but decide to do a 2 or 3 day fast for spiritual purification purposes, not anything to do with diet, etc., how should we get back on track to return to training, and will we lose muscle or strength drastically as a natural? You can get 100% back into training. Day one, you can max out. Follow the most intense workout of your life, it doesn't matter. Now, for some of you say, oh, it's dangerous. You're giving bad advice. I've done well over 10 fasts. I have a tremendous amount of experience. I've been doing them since 2018. And during this cut, I'll be doing a lot of them as well. Not that I'm saying you should do them. Actually, I will say don't. That's my disclaimer. Don't do fasting. It works, but don't do it. So, answering your question, are you going to lose muscle or performance? Muscle, no. 2 or 3 days is not enough for that to happen. Performance, you might be a little bit depleted and your work capacity could suffer slightly. But the worst that's going to happen is you drop a few reps on some of your movements. I suppose I would compare it to being in a 1 to 2 week calorie deficit. But it's not going to be this massive game changer. Like if you were able to bench 330 on a strong day, you'll still be able to bench 315 after fasting for 2 or 3 days. Heck, at the end of 2020, I remember doing heavy singles while fasted. So I was in the process of literally being depleted, having no energy in me whatsoever. I was still strong as hell. I think I got like 160 or 165 on the way to chin. And it was a sub-maximal single. The people who say you're going to sap away all your strength have obviously never done this. Like I said, your energy might be a bit lower, but if you force yourself, you actually try, you'll find that you're A-okay. Hey Alex, my bench and barbell row numbers are almost identical at 75 kilos, yet I have quite rounded shoulders, so much so I recently got injured in shoulders doing pronated pull-ups with 20 kgs. Any solution on how to fix this, as a traditional posture fixing tutorial on YouTube aren't working for me? Thanks. Yeah, those posture videos are trash. They're just there to get views, and those people don't actually care about you. And the evidence does not suggest that what they're promoting actually works. So strength training is the true answer here. Now, you're talking about the bench and row ratio, right? As if that's the only thing that matters for shoulder health. There's a lot of other factors. The biggest one being overuse. You can have the perfect exercise selection, but if that's all you do and your volume is accumulating past the point where you're unable to recover and fatigue is starting to cause some wear and tear, or in general, your form on those movements is off, so much can go wrong. So I know that's vague, but we can't just look at one aspect of the program. There's a system to this. And without seeing what you're doing, it's so hard for me to give accurate recommendations. But what I could suggest, based off experience, is that most people who say they row as much as their bench are liars. Not in a literal sense, but on a technical level. And the barbell row specifically is one of the most butchered exercises of all time. Almost everybody swings their body. They're doing a hip hinge and their body is upright. If you really want to match your bench, do you know what it would have to be? A perfectly horizontal position, like a seal row or an inverted row. I think that's the missing link here. So if you can bench 75 kgs, you should be able to seal row that same amount. If you can't, maybe that says a little something, but then again, it's not just about the row. What about the shoulder mechanics? Are you retracting and then pulling? Maybe you should stop doing that. Just pull in one fluid motion. What about the pull-ups? That's what got you injured, right? Maybe you don't have the overhead mobility. So you have to start working in those dead hangs without weight. Maybe it's you jerking on the way down because you're going so fast that it's causing a pulling sensation on some of the nerves and creating additional overuse. I know this was a big problem for me on the wide grip pull-up. Heck, maybe your grip is off. Did you try narrowing things out? So there's a lot to say here, but beyond matching your row, which again is an arbitrary recommendation, it's generally helpful, but it's not perfect. Like there's no way I'm gonna strict row my bench. I can cheat row it, and I think it's more accurate when you're advanced or elite, but at your level, being novice, late, soon intermediate, you gotta look at these other things I just talked about. Hi Alex, how have you been? I have a question regarding sets. Do you prefer counting sets as movement patterns or by muscle groups? Sincerely, Benjamin. Muscle groups all day. For example, in the recent workout video, I did weighted chin-ups, then wide grip pull-ups right after. How would I quantify that? Lats, then upper back. Even though they're both a vertical movement pattern, the muscular emphasis is different. What about a weighted dip? It's been suggested that technically it's a vertical push, but the prime mover is the chest. What about the delts? I do 3 sets of overhead press once a week, but that goes below the recommended guidelines for hypertrophy. Yet somehow my shoulders continue to grow like weeds. How is that physically possible? Well, because the anterior delts get worked on all your other presses. So in reality, it's closer to 10 plus sets a week. So it's not just the movement, we have to look at the overlap between everything. What do you think about splitting your training into 2 sessions in one day? Some people do this because of time restrictions, so they might work out in the morning, then in the afternoon, or morning and night. In my experience of doing this, it's kind of annoying. And by the second workout, you don't really want to work out, though the advantage is your fatigue is a little bit lower, and you might have better quality sets on that second session because you waited so long. It's like super rest intervals in a sense. But that also means your net recovery will be affected because there's some hours in between. So I think it's better to train hard one time and then kickstart the recovery process. This way you'll get the full amount that you need instead of constantly going at it. But again, if you have to do this, fine. Like I've had some workout videos where I took a bit of a break. Some things came up. Life happens. It is what it is. But it's definitely not my preference, and it should happen organically. Not that you're literally going to force this. Or maybe it's slightly extended by like 15 minutes at the very end. So mini breaks, but not 5 hours. Is there an actual difference between rings and TRXs? If so, which is more practical? Rings are the original way. TRX is more markety. Not that it's not effective, just that it's suspension. Very basic. The ring is the same thing, but using a wooden circular handle as your implement. Now, the thing is, they're a lot cheaper, and the kits you buy these days generally come with the handles that you can clip on, which gives you all the features that you need. So if you don't like ring flies, you prefer having a firmer grip that's not in the false position, you can do that. There's nothing you can't do is what I'm saying. Everything is available to you. Once you have the suspension set up, you're good to go. And like I said, rings have been around for a very long time. They build world-class physiques. They're easily accessible, inexpensive. To me, it's a no-brainer. Why is it that whenever I cut, all my lifts stay the same except bench press? Just finished a cut and I went from benching 225 for 8 to 225 for 4. Well, first of all, congratulations. Not only on the cut, but maintaining a lot of bench strength. You did freaking good, my man. You know, a lot of guys in your position would be struggling to move 185 after a cut. Like, do you realize how impressive this is? That's a joke, because you're going to gain back that strength in 1 to 3 months, not even. Actually, with you, it's going to be fast. So you basically maintained all your muscle, is what I'm telling you. That's the best case scenario. But yeah, it is true that the bench press generally gets the most impacted, as well as squats. The deadlift is actually the least impacted by weight gain. In some cases, could be a hindrance if you get really fat, such as your belly's in the way, and now you got to widen out that stance and your arm placement. That's why all the strongmen do it like that. They're also tall freaks and use a different kind of form, but whatever. Bench press is usually the first lift to go. In my case, it drops a lot more than that. And again, it comes down to leverages. With the bench press, you have a thicker chest, so there's a higher touch point, and the upper back does the same thing as well. So you're bigger. And then you can argue that mass moves mass. Or in general, you have a lot more intramuscular effects going on. All right, final question of the week. Why does my lower body grow like crazy from extremely minimalistic training, but my upper body struggles to pack on any mass? Few factors going on here, but most people tend to have an easier time building legs, and just getting to intermediate typically results in nice quads and glutes. Like, anyone who looks at you will tell that you train your legs. You're not a skipper. Whereas upper body, a lot of guys can bench 200 pounds and not really look that impressive. It's why, sorry, I'm not trying to be offensive, many people cope by getting really strong in the leg department, but their upper body is rather mediocre. So they end up with lower, dominant, heavy physiques. Hey, if that's your thing, you do you, but I'm sure most people got in this game to look better on top. Pecs, arms, abs, aesthetics. Notice how aesthetics is always in relation to the upper body. I think if people are being honest, they would agree that they care more about their upper body. I don't believe for a second when I see polls saying, yeah, legs are my #1 priority. I don't think so. So that's my perspective. But basically, guys, if you get your squat around 3 plates, your legs might be 23 inches or somewhere close to it. And that's not a bad measurement. I know we see a lot of freaks out here with 30-inch quads. I squatted 507 and had 27-inch legs. They're fucking massive. If you look at old school bodybuilders, most of them had 25 to 26. That's big. And that's when you take your legs to an advanced or elite level. So if you're intermediate and a few inches below that, which is still an absolute good measurement, then of course your legs will look good. But the upper body, you know, the equivalent to that might be 14 and a half, 15-inch arms. It scales differently, is what I'm saying. Your chest, you might be barely scratching 40 inches. You know, your shirt size might not be up there. You're gonna have to get way stronger for you to get that effect. And the thing is, there's so many more movement patterns in your upper body. Like for legs, what do you realistically have to do? A squat and a hip hinge, for the most part. But even if you did nothing but squats, you'd still have some decent legs. That's a lot of the old school guys did it, because they didn't even have access to machines, and we didn't practice some of the movements that we commonly do. So Leroy Colbert used to say, all we used to do back then was squat. Now, it was reflected in their physiques. We have better legs in the modern age, but just to say, they still got very far by only doing squats. And I will also admit in my case, I can get away with a lot more minimalistic training in terms of hypertrophy. Longevity, though, might be a different story. You might get snapped the hell up. Like, I'm someone who's rather built to squat. But if I only do that for the rest of my lifting career, I'm probably gonna have some knee and back problems. I need more variation. So rambling aside, which I did a ton of in this Q&A, put simply, the upper body is harder to build, and you have to consider a lot more movement patterns and isolation work to correct certain muscles that might not get maximally stimulated from minimalism. Anecdotally, this is what we've seen over the years. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Q&A. Let's see some more questions down below, and I'll talk to you all next time.